welcome to Pen Night Radio, where we slay our personal demons and arm ourselves to write our best content. I am your host, PK, unofficially knighted by a fictional character, which means you do not have to call me sir. For our purposes, PK will do just fine. I'm very excited for today's topic. I was able to interview an old friend, someone who has been with One True Promotion from the start, one of our favorite contacts, a frequent guest on Drop-A-Line, and someone who is now an award-winning author, who I'm very excited to talk to later on in the show. But this is someone who actually has his own science fiction podcast. And that is our topic for today. It is why sci-fi. The science fiction genre is everywhere. It's been everywhere in the late 20th century and the early 20th century. What am I talking about? And has, of course, continued in popularity throughout the 21st century. And this is true in the world of media, in the world of comics. But what you may not know is that science fiction is still going very strong here in the world of literature and self-publishing. So I would like to talk about science fiction's influences on my work this morning before our guest comes on. So let's dive into why we're here. Let's take out our pens and slay those demons that are pulling us down today. My friends, I cannot talk today. Let's dive into why we're here and slay those demons that are holding us back today. Then we write. I would like anybody who does this and is also a teacher to know that it is not your fault. Seriously, if you listen to Pen Night Radio and you've noticed that in recent episodes I'm bumbling over my words a lot more than when I started, the issue is not preparation. I'm still very prepared for these episodes. Sometimes I have a script that I follow. You'll notice that if you're watching on YouTube, if my eyes kind of trail off the screen. Versus when I'm talking off the cuff, whereas my eyes are now pointed directly at the camera. You'll notice that from episode to episode, I either have a script ready because there are some points that I really, really want to address. And in some episodes, I just kind of talk off the cuff because we're just, having a conversation and I'm comfortable talking about the topic to a degree that a script is not required. But the reason I stammer so gosh darn much is because I am also a teacher now. I'm a public school teacher. I've mentioned that on the show before. I've been in the business as a substitute, personal aide, a long-term substitute, teaching English and language arts for the past, I want to say 7 years now. Yeah, I think it's about going on 7 years I've been doing all that. But officially, as a teacher, I was hired last year and have been doing the whole job for a year and a half now. And already I feel like my brain is scrambled, honestly. I pretty much come home wanting to do nothing but just sit in front of the television and just let my mind rot until I'm ready to use it again. But we can't do that because we got One True Promotion, we got books to publish, we've got a podcast to get out. So what I'm trying to tell you is I appreciate your patience while I keep butchering these openings and transitions on this show. Let's say by next episode, or maybe the episode after that, this will cease to be a problem. We'll get old PK up to snuff here. Science fiction. I was born in 1992. In 1992, we were in the midst of what was called the Disney Renaissance. Disney, of course, had been making movies since the early 20th century. And they'd had their ups and downs financially throughout that time period. But the 90s were a time where, after the parks were in danger of closing at the end of the 80s, they were also building Epcot at the time, I believe, and were really in need of funds. So the 90s were a time when they started, getting together and making more movies to higher content, higher quality movies. The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, which was the first animated movie to ever be to ever win an award, and The Lion King, of course, which became a smash cultural phenomenon and made a tremendous amount of money. We were living in that time period. And what was going on in science fiction around that time was, Star Wars, the original Star Wars trilogy, which was insanely popular since the 70s and 80s, was still, very popular to watch. That was what they put on for me when I wasn't watching Disney. They put on Star Wars for me because I liked Star Wars. I liked Luke Skywalker, Harrison Ford. I liked all the aliens. I liked Darth Vader, and I was a Star Wars kid. It was on pretty much all the time, and it was kind of a sin not to like Star Wars. It had done so much for the film industry at that point. That basically, if you weren't into it, there was something seriously wrong with you, or at least that's the impression that I got. I believe around that time, we're talking late 80s, early 90s, Jurassic Park was also a huge hit. And it was a huge hit for the advancements that were being made in CGI. And of course, the Star Wars prequels came at the end of the 90s, right around the time that The Matrix came out. These are all titles that we don't necessarily talk about because depending on who you talk to these days, it's either, a good subject or a bad subject to get on. But the point I'm trying to make with just calling out titles here and trying to paint a picture of the era is science fiction just since the time that just before I was born really became this cultural phenomenon that I would argue we saw everywhere. The most popular cartoon show on television when I was a kid in the 90s was Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z had been imported over from Japan, where it was already very popular in the 70s and 80s. And it was translated into English, and it was first viewed by American children when I was just a kid. I was seeing the first English episodes of it, as was Andrew here at One True Promotion, as was our guest who's coming on today, as was pretty much everybody. Not pretty much everybody, but as were a lot of people that we associate with here in the self-publishing world. We were all Dragon Ball Z kids. And interestingly, Dragon Ball Z was the second half of the series. The manga series, manga, if you don't know, is like a comic book, but it's a Japanese story told in a reverse order. You read the pages right to left instead of left to right, usually in black and white, usually with a very specific style. I'm not qualified to talk about the beginning and end of manga, but it was a popular manga series, Dragon Ball, a pioneer in many ways, and it was just called Dragon Ball. I mean, Dragon Ball Z, the episodes that we watched in the 90s was one of the later arcs. I think it was like volume 18 or something of the original manga. And interestingly, it begins with an alien coming from outer space. And challenging Earth's strongest warriors to a battle that they can't win because they've never fought anybody from space before. And it focused so heavily on martial arts, and spirit energy. It was called ki, and they did ki blasts like the Kamehameha wave and all that. And this is all fantasy mythology type content there. But as soon as it becomes popular internationally, we're seeing aliens come down from outer space. The point I'm trying to make is science fiction really was and has been everywhere. I feel like elements of science fiction have leaked their way into a bulk of the world's popular media. So what is science fiction? Let's dive into that. How is science fiction defined? How do you know whether or not you are writing science fiction or not? Science fiction is a genre of speculative fiction which typically deals with imaginative and futuristic concepts such as advanced science and technology, space exploration, time travel, parallel universes, and extraterrestrial life. Pardon me. It is related to fantasy, horror, and superhero fiction and contains many subgenres. Its exact definition has long been disputed among authors, critics, scholars, and readers. Science fiction in literature, film, television, and other media has become popular and influential over much of the world. I'm going to stop right there because honestly, that pretty much is the crux of what I want to talk about here. And I don't want to just use this episode to recite what Wikipedia or any other article could tell you about a genre you know well. What I really want to do is just sort of review the subject and then bring it back and talk about how it influences the work that we do here on Pen Night Radio at One True Promotion. But science fiction, is so versatile. Star Wars is about, a farm boy who receives a message from a princess and decides that he's going to join a rebellion against the evil Galactic Empire and become a Jedi Knight like his father. They hop onto a spaceship and they just fly up into space without spacesuits or anything. It's a lot of Star Wars, if you really try to apply logic to it, is so surreal that some would argue it doesn't even really qualify as a science fiction. George Lucas said that it was a space opera. It was a soap opera in space. It wasn't really even supposed to be sciency, even though that was the impact it had on a lot of viewers. A lot of people said that they loved the sciences because of Star Wars. But yeah, no, I mean, even its own creator didn't really specifically use the phrase science fiction. I'm not sure. That brings us back to the fact that science fiction has subgenres. There's science fiction fantasy, there's science fiction horror. A great example of that, Andrew and I have talked about this on Pen Night Radio a lot, but a great example of science fiction and horror coming together is the Alien series. Alien, is one of the landmark science fiction series as well. It tells the tale of a space crew that picks up a strange visitor, and all of a sudden, this thing is running around pretty much taking out everybody. Great movie. And followed by an even better action movie where they decide to put it mildly, go back out and get some vengeance. But so if you're into sci-fi, that's not something that anybody can put in a box. Your science fiction might be a fantasy series about mystic knights with laser swords. Your science fiction might be a team of regular old humans in spacesuits encountering an alien race. Your science fiction might not even be in space. It might just be in a futuristic setting of Earth where everybody lives inside of a computer. That was The Matrix. One interesting thing that they all have in common is that they all dealt with the idea of imperialism or fascism. You know what I mean? Star Wars was about overcoming the evil galactic empire. The Matrix was about winning a war against a race of machines that are literally making slaves of humans and using them up like batteries. Morpheus says to Neo, you got to break out of your bondage. Alien, as far as I can tell, has more of an underscore of people being set up. It's not just that aliens and monsters are bad, that there's some like foreign, creature that comes out of the darkness, as a demon. We'll get back to that. As a demon and attacks, pure good people. But no, there was an added element, if you've seen the movie, that some of the crew were set up to actually get killed because the people that they were working for wanted the data on extraterrestrial life. So that brings it back to the theme of human corruption. There's a lot of that in the popular science fiction that blew up in the 90s and continued into the 21st century. And my goodness, I didn't even talk about video games. I didn't even talk about how the Final Fantasy game series, which was formative for me. I spent a lot of my childhood watching my brother play those games, and I was just absolutely transfixed, even though, but I'm not even going to say that. That's another topic. But Final Fantasy had been a series that was popular before that. There were 6 games already before that, and they dealt very heavily with fantasy content, and witches and warlocks and, gods and demigods and all that stuff, very Greek, very mythological. But Final Fantasy VII was a science fiction. It was futuristic. It was about a company using high-tech machinery to absorb life energy out of the world. They were sucking up lifeblood from the planet and using it to power their fancy homes. And the good guys start out as a group of, well, terrorists that are blowing up government property so that they can, stop this whole operation from continuing. I mean, it's just like, so Final Fantasy VII was a game that revolutionized gaming. It's still to this day one of the most popular games of all time. It's currently being remade and serialized, and the second part is coming out just a few weeks from now, and so excited. I cannot wait. I already pre-ordered it. I'm just waiting for it to download. Um, but do you see the pattern? There's an immensely popular video game, science fiction. There's an immensely influential film trilogy, Star Wars, science fiction. There's breakthroughs being made in CGI and encouraging people to use this technology to create more bold visions for movies in the 21st century. Science fiction again, adapting Jurassic Park, making more Star Wars movies. All of these, big moments are are utilizing rather the science fiction genre, and I just think that that is incredible. I think it's incredible because, truth be told, my favorite thing is still Lord of the Rings. I was raised on Star Wars and Disney and some science fiction classics, but when I got to be at a more formative age in late elementary school, Peter Jackson, I had presumably been inspired like everybody else from what they all saw in Jurassic Park, and decided that he was going to use new technology to adapt one of the world's hardest novels to adapt. The Lord of the Rings was always such a bloated fantasy book, and serialized in such a way that one entire volume is about half the cast and another half of the volume is just about the two main characters. The story structure is just so off in the book with, going back in time and telling everything that happened up to this point, that people were basically stumped on how to make a good movie out of this thing. And of course, the final cuts of it were still 3-hour long theatrical releases, which was way, way less common at the time. So it might not even be something that you're into. But it's my favorite because it hit me at such a formative age. And I love the fantasy genre when it's done thoughtfully and creatively. But I cannot deny that we wouldn't have even gotten there without these advancements that were being made a couple decades before that. And it seemed to me they were primarily being made in the sci-fi genre. What is so popular about sci-fi? What is it that makes sci-fi so good? And why do we still rely on it here at One True Promotion? I personally, having interviewed two sci-fi authors very recently, including in today's episode, and understanding the impacts that it's had on me, I think that science fiction really tests the limits of human imagination. We're always looking forward to the future. We're always thinking about what can we create next? And when we create something, how can we use that creation? The Matrix really isn't something that came out of thin air. The Matrix was continuing a conversation that was already happening about the creation of artificial intelligence, of AI. And it's a drama about AI turning on humanity. And from that come a lot of biblical and philosophical themes. But the conversations about AI and what can it do. I can't believe I forgot to mention Terminator. That was a much earlier series that dealt with the concept of artificial intelligence turning on humanity in a really unpleasant way. These are all thoughts that we were having as technology advanced in the mid 20th century. And I guess it's inevitable that that kind of thought, as we were just getting into this age of rapidly increasing what human beings were able to create and have access to, home computers, personal computers in the form of laptops, iPods and cell phones, and then the iPhone, and then, the world we live in today where you carry around the entire internet in your pocket everywhere you go. I mean, we've all just lived in this time of rapid advancement. To talk about just one aspect of the economy, that's not even discussing cars and everything in the auto industry. We This is the century, I think, of just trying to advance the human experience in every way possible. And it's no surprise that that leaked into our storytelling. I was so surprised when I went back to Dragon Ball Z, which was a martial arts, magic series, and just it just occurred to me, oh yeah, they do kind of just fight people from space a lot. Then they fly up in spaceships and they go to other planets and they continue fighting there. It's like this is a sci-fi. This is very much, an alien is trying to destroy the world, and Earth's special forces are pushing back on it. So, how does sci-fi help me? How can sci-fi help you? Science fiction, I think, because it paints with such a broad brush and can be broken down into so many different categories, I really think there's something there for everybody. When I created the Meridian trilogy, Barker's Rules, there's a lot of ways you can write a serial killer horror novel. There's a lot of ways you can write a kidnapping, survival, escape from captivity book. Barker's Rules is both of those things. It's about Melanie Greer trying to escape from the tyranny of Justin Barker. But what it argues from the beginning is that in this case, the protagonists are so easily overcome and the main protagonist is so easily abducted because Barker is a superhuman, and that superhuman element to him is due to a genetic mutation. It's due to a genetic mutation that has made him incredibly strong. Him and many other people who live in this society known as the Meridian. And because people are absolutely terrified of them, because with their changed DNA and their strength and their speed also comes a heightened sense of anxiety and aggression, and in many cases, a sense of conduct disorder. Or rather, I should have said a trend of conduct disorder in the many different Meridian killers, as they are called. It basically they form a society where they can rely on each other to have each other's backs, and then it grows into a dystopia where as long as they can keep their territory a secret, they think they can do whatever they want. And Barker especially is a character who lives above the law. He believes that because he's been able to intimidate everybody and the police in his local area, that they are just so terrified that this depraved, unstoppable superhuman will come after them, will come after their wives, come after their kids. He basically thinks he can do whatever he wants. So he takes this person because he can. And what Melanie is really escaping from isn't just, physical restraints and locked doors and the threat of being killed. She's escaping from the world of a person who believes others are his to control. She's escaping from the consequences of this mutation. So the basic premise of the Meridian novels is a science fiction concept. It's basically saying if the human gene advanced to this level and an organization were formed in order to utilize them and shield them from discovery so that they could protect their investments, well, then, how would this not turn into, a seed of corruption that might even grow to be more vicious than all of the terrorist organizations of the world, every government of the world, because all of them together would be able to do nothing against these superhumans. So that's really why Barker's Rules is a kidnapping novel. It's a kidnapping novel because an ordinary person who doesn't know any of this, it hasn't been in the news, nobody's been talking about it, to her life is normal. When she finds herself in the grip of such a person, she finds that she is basically, uh, becoming enslaved to his will, being abused at every turn, being psychologically changed and molded into someone who has to potentially do things that she would never otherwise do if she has any hope of seeing home again. All of this stems from the idea of, is it the mutation? Is it the science fiction mutation that drives a man crazy? Or is this power being used horribly because he was already crazy? And that's, I would argue, exactly the logic that goes into a lot of the sci-fi series that we see. How far is too far? How much advancement is too much advancement? When governments become armed with alien technology, are they possible to overcome? Um, with the presence of alien technology, which means that humans can get a hold of it, is it not possible for old-fashioned heroes to come back now that there are weapons with which they can use to overcome any threat? This is where we move away from Meridian and go into the Calipar. The Calipar is, I've been calling it a fantasy, and I'll continue calling it a fantasy because it emphasizes the idea of magic. But really, this is also a science fiction fantasy concept. The fact that, you know, the power that is taken from this artifact blade, which contains a demonic spirit inside of it, changes the very DNA of Richard Renovan. It changes who he is inside. It makes him a warrior who can push back on other demons, but it changes him. It might change him into a person who's not very heroic if he gets too much of a demonic influence into his mind. It might alter his brain chemistry altogether. You see, science fiction can bleed into any genre that utilizes magic. If we start talking about DNA changes and how the presence of magic affects the creation of new technology, and how demons possessing animals can suddenly mutate that beast into a much more powerful beast. I mean, what happens when you spill, pardon me, a demon's blood? What happens when humans get that blood inside of them? Is there some kind of infection? Can that blood be mass distributed and used as a chemical weapon? I mean, do you guys see what I'm saying? Even if you're writing a fantasy, there are ways in which you can creatively use your lore and your world building to homage to science fiction. Because really, I would argue that science fiction at its core just pushes the boundaries of what human beings are capable of doing. And I think because that question is so interesting to all of us, that it continues to be a very popular genre. So, why sci-fi? I think we answered that pretty well, and I want to thank you for listening so far. But listen, we're going to talk to somebody who's way more of an expert on this subject, because he has written a fabulous series of science fiction novels. I'm reading one of them right now. It is a space heist novel, and it is super cool. So thank you for joining us for this episode of Pen Night Radio. Stick around an extra minute, and we will be back with our next guest for Drop a Line.